Have you ever watched a video or a movie and thought about it for a long time afterwards? Well, I try to do that with videos such as Is School More Important Than Mental Health? And Kid Gets Wrecked by Milk Crate. But I'm not here to talk about those masterpieces. Today, I want to talk about 4 speeches that changed my life. Okay, future self. This one holds dear to my heart because the description is, who will you be in 10 years, in 20 years? Envisioning how you will evolve is very hard. In this episode, we share ideas on how to plan for a better future while also allowing for the unexpected. And that's really the whole premise of this everyday project thing, which, oh, thanks for the indicator, future me. Future me, there you go, it's the title of the podcast, wow!
This isn't the first moment in history where people are experiencing this high degree of existential terror and angst, right? So now one could say these are unprecedented events and the confluence of them is particularly unprecedented. Time marches on, time progresses. So if we want to bury our heads in the sand because the future feels so scary, we can, but that doesn't mean that the future won't come.
I hate this question of where do you see yourself in 5 years because I don't know where I'm going to see myself in the next year, let alone the next 5. The emphasis of this Future Me episode is enabling what people call the balance of stopping to smell the roses and also being productive for the sake of your future self.
I wonder, is there a way to give a little bit more to the future, whether that comes in terms of saving or whatever sort of the flavor of the decision might be. It is a question of figuring out what's the allocation of resources between now and later so that later doesn't become much worse than it is or that we fear it's going to be.
A segment that I want to preach from this episode from Hal Hershfield, and this is paraphrasing here, is that balance is a bad word to describe life. Harmony is much better. Balance implies trade-offs like a seesaw. Up or down, but never really stable. Harmony, however, in music, is 2 people singing at different levels and both are heard. The same can be said for the voices of your present self and your future self. And so with that, be kind to both of these people. They both have the same mind and they both have the same body, but they'll know a little bit more about life when you meet them. Okay, so less stuff, more happiness. Graham Hill talks about how the average American has multiplied. Graham Hill talks about how in the last 50 years, the average American has more than tripled their living space, and yet there's still a storage problem. More stuff means a larger environmental footprint, more stuff to keep track of, clean, and just like inflation, the more things you have, the less value you put on each thing.
Smaller space is going to make for smaller utilities. Save some more money there, but also a smaller footprint.
The 3 things he mentions to having a better physical life is to 1, ruthlessly edit possessions. If it's sentimental or important or utility, obviously keep it, but also know the cost of keeping it for a few years, both physically, mentally, and economically, I guess. Like whatever you're doing right now, I want you to look up and to your left and tell me how important that thing is going to be in the next 5 years. And I really hope you're looking at an inanimate object, otherwise I am such an asshole.
So when you go home and you walk through your front door, take a second and ask yourselves, could I do with a little life editing? Would that give me a little more freedom? Maybe a little more time?
Number 2, prioritize efficiency and functional items. Kind of like how in van life the wall unit will fold down to be a table or a bed to save space. This won't be applicable to everything, but the things that he mentions in his talk are very interesting.
A sink's combined with a toilet. A dining table becomes a bed, same space. A little side table stretches out to seat 10.
And number 3, the one that I love the most, digitize paperwork and floating media. Digital space has gotten a lot cheaper in these recent years, and the long-term return on investment is a lot higher than you might think. Now, if you're not a minimalist or you don't want to get rid of things, I'm not saying that this is for everybody. I watched this one in high school. The video is over a decade old, but it completely changed my thought process moving into college. It's just a quick 5-minute speech, but I still very much resonate with it, so.
An edited set of possessions, my favorite stuff, and really designed for me. I'm really excited to be there.
Okay, how changing the story changes your life. We are what we take away from the stories we have in our heads. What you know now made you who you are today, and how you got there is the way that you learned. If that sounded like ramble to you, then in short, you are who you make yourself out to be in your own story.
We get to be the hero and not the victim in our stories. We get to choose what goes on the page that lives in our minds and shapes our realities. And that life is about deciding which stories to listen to and which ones need an edit. And that it's worth the effort to go through a revision because there's nothing more important to the quality of our lives than the stories we tell ourselves about them.
She talks about empathy, understanding why sometimes stories are told the way they are, and dissects the way that we learn about the world around us is often not too different to how we would be writing a story or a novel. And as life continues, you're gonna have to figure out how to write and rewrite the part of the story that you're living. Yeah, it's a cliche, but also it was really nice to see someone putting words to thoughts that I've been having for a while that I've had trouble explaining for myself.
They're the people who, when you try to offer them a suggestion, they reject it with, yeah, no, that'll never work, because what they're really rejecting is an edit to their story of misery and stuckness. Usually take a different approach. And what I do is I say something else. I say to them, we're all gonna die. I'll bet you're really glad I'm not your therapist right now. There's a story that gets written about all of us eventually. It's called an obituary. And I say that instead of being the authors of our own unhappiness, we get to shape these stories while we're still alive.
Reinterpreting your past is the whole reason I keep making videos today, and it's the reason why this streak is so long of me filming every day. Mark Roper, the YouTuber who now has over 20 million subscribers on YouTube, gave this talk before he started working for places like NASA and Apple. I was shown this talk in school and it completely changed how I learn new things. And also calmed me down at college when I wanted to put my head through a wall. The premise of the Super Mario effect is that when you're playing a Mario game and you fall into a ditch or you die to an enemy, you don't just give up. You take the information you learned and you apply it to the next time you go about the level so that you have a little more knowledge than you did before and you can encounter a different challenge to overcome.
There were lots of other examples from my own personal experience where this attitude of life gamification, this Super Mario effect, led to more success and therefore more learning.
The only discouraging part about this is that you lose lives, but what if there was no penalty for failure? Unlimited tries, no reason to get mad, and you can go as far as you want as long as you have the will to do so.
The Super Mario effect. Focusing on the princess and not the pits, to stick with the task and to learn more.
Mark also created his own game in order to study the behavior of players, and he found that players that weren't penalized for their mistakes ended up playing longer and learning more than players who simply gave up after being discouraged.
In one version, if you failed, we simply took away 5 no value in the real world, completely meaningless fake internet points. For those who were penalized for failed attempts, their success rate was around 52%. For those who were not penalized, their success rate was 68%.
The funny thing was he mentioned how babies aren't discouraged from trying to take their first steps. They keep going until they get it, and that's something that you should apply to more than just your first steps. As life becomes more complicated, it feels easier to get discouraged than to be optimistic, but the latter is so much more rewarding.
So those who didn't see failing in a negative light nearly had 2.5 times more attempts to solve the puzzle. As a result, naturally, they saw more success and therefore learned more.
One honorable mention that I want to bring up, and there's a specific quote I want to take from it, was Ed Helms doing a graduation speech at Cornell.
Only a fool would risk failure. Be that fool. I was a fool for taking on more than I could handle, and it was brutal. But at least I had an outcome. And outcomes, whether good or bad, allow us to move forward. Had I not been foolish, I never would have done it, and then all I'd have is a vague sense of regret and wonder, which is at best useless and at worst paralyzing.
I've been making these diary entry archive videos since 2020 that document how it feels to get older and figure things out. So if that's for you, maybe you should subscribe. And if it's not, how the hell did you make it this far in the video? That's crazy. And I don't know why I'm so far back, but I'll link everything I talked about in this video down below if you want to look at them. And I recommend you do, because some of these just got me completely amped up to be alive. What stood out to you? What was most relatable? Let me know down below, and while you're down there, hit the buttons, you know which ones, and take it easy.